Hello everyone, welcome to episode 1 of Linux for Your Average Gamer. Now in this episode I'm going to be covering for starters what this channel is about, what this series is about, and I'm going to start the wonderful series of explaining how to use Linux, how to get the best experience out of Linux, and just stuff like that for anyone who might be looking to switch over from a different operating system, most likely Windows, but just anything in general. If you're from macOS, you're going to have the best experience, but still. So, for starters, this channel is pretty much my second channel where I upload just different stuff related to computers. It could be anything from how to upgrade your graphics card to how to get different programs or games running on your computer. And it's not going to be just Linux, it's going to be Windows and stuff. Like, I'm planning on doing a video of how to get Fallout 3 working on Windows 10. So, just pretty much different stuff like that. If you somehow found this channel not from my gaming channel, be sure to go check my gaming channel out. It's linked in the description of planning on every video. And there I upload funny comedy and games and stuff like that. Well, usually with friends, and I also live stream a lot there. So be sure to go and check that out and subscribe so you don't miss another video. And also be sure to subscribe to this channel if you want to see more of not only this series but more of this channel. And if you find this video useful, be sure to drop a like. But I'm just going to get right into this. So for starters, I need to explain some basic concepts. A lot of people, when they're how to use Linux series, will probably just start with, well, you use this distribution, and then this is how you install it, and different stuff like that. I'm going to devote the first episode to explaining different Linux definitions and terms, and what distributions are, and then end it with what distribution I recommend the most. Now in this video, I'm not going to be talking about how to install it, but I will be putting another video up that will be talking about that. So I'm just going to get right into this. So to start things off, I need to explain something called open source. What is open source? Well, chances are you might already know what open source is. If you know what it is from a movie, then you most likely don't know what it is. Open source basically is a project or application or just something like that the code is readily available for anyone and everyone to view. Open source is cool because usually pretty much every open source project is always free. Now, granted, not every open source project is free, and I mean like in terms of money, but usually open source software is free, which is very nice. I like free software much the next guy. Another term that you need to know is fork. Now, contrary to popular belief, fork is not a piece of silverware, at least not in this case. A fork, in the terms of open source, is whenever you make a copy of an open source project. Now, this copy is now yours to maintain, modify, distribute, whatever you want to do to it. The reason why this is significant in the case of Linux, and the reason why you need to know it, is because you're pretty much never going to be using the raw Linux kernel in and of itself. You're pretty much always going to be using a fork of the Linux kernel. Now, some name-worthy mentions are Debian, Arch Linux, Red Hat. These are different forks of the Linux kernel. They use the Linux kernel code, but they're still modified, usually to serve a different purpose. Now, I keep talking about the Linux kernel, and I think I need to explain what the kernel is. Now, Linux on its own is not a full operating system. Whenever someone says, well, I use Linux, they use a Linux distribution, which is a full operating system that simply uses the Linux kernel as its kernel. Now, what is a kernel? A kernel is a piece of software that every single operating system has. It allows the applications running inside the operating system to communicate with the hardware of the computer. A simple example would be if you enable hardware acceleration in your browser or Discord or something like that, the kernel would be the mediator between the application and your graphics card. So obviously, to make a full operating system, you have to pair some software with the Linux kernel. That's where distributions come in. Distributions are full operating systems that use the Linux kernel under the hood, paired with some extra software to make it into an actually usable operating system. Things that you've probably never heard of, like a network connections manager, a drive manager, a device manager, to things you're probably more familiar with, like an image viewer, a web browser, and different stuff like that. Now, if any of this seems complicated, believe me, it's not really complicated, it's just my inability to explain it in truly simple terms. But now that I've explained open source, Linux, distributions, different things like that, now we need to actually talk about different distributions and the one that's ultimately right for you. So, the one thing that you need to realize is a lot of people present their distribution of choice as the Linux distribution that you should use. Oh, it's the best, you should use this, all other Linux distributions come short. The truth of the matter is, no Linux distribution is the best. They all simply meet your different needs. Some Linux distributions are more advanced, while others give an easier to use experience for people who are newer to Linux. But back to the topic at hand, what Linux distribution should you use? So, a lot of beginners might gravitate towards something like Ubuntu or Pop! OS, which I don't know if you know of either of those, but to put it in a nutshell, they're both very simple and easy to use Linux distributions. But there's a reason behind why I recommend not using them. Chances are you want the highest level of compatibility whenever you're using Linux, meaning that you want the most Windows games and programs and different stuff like that to work on your operating system. And that's where SteamOS comes in. Now, I'm not recommending you use SteamOS, just hear me out. Now, if you don't already know, SteamOS is a custom-made Linux distribution made by Valve. It's not specifically made for the Steam Deck, but as of version 3.0, it is aimed at the Steam Deck. Now, Valve did state at the launch of the Steam Deck that they plan to make every single game in the Steam library able to run on the Steam Deck. Now, granted, this is a very big claim, and chances are it won't ever be true, but they have made patches and compatibility fixes and different stuff like that in order to get a ton of games on the Steam library to run on the Steam Deck. And Valve already did state that these fixes and patches and stuff like that would be brought over to normal Linux distributions. Now, granted, this does mean that if you're using Linux, you're going to get these patches, but in order to maximize our chances of compatibility, it'd probably be best to run a Linux distribution using the same Linux kernel as the SteamOS Linux distribution. And SteamOS is running Arch. Arch is a fork of the Linux kernel, and it's my personal recommendation as to what Linux kernel you should use. Now, Arch on its own is a Linux distribution that you could use, but it's a very difficult distribution to use, so we're going to look for distributions that are based on Arch. There's a lot of other reasons as to why you should use Arch, but I'm not going to cover that here because I don't want this video to be too long. Now, one of the most popular, if not the most popular distributions, excluding SteamOS, that uses Arch Linux is Manjaro. Now, Manjaro is a good Linux distribution, especially for beginners, but it does have a few problems. For starters, it has minor modifications made to the Arch Linux kernel. Now, normally this won't result in issues, but it's very possible that a normal package from the Arch Linux package repositories, which whenever I say package, I mean just an application or a program, but it's very possible that some applications made for Arch Linux won't work on Manjaro because of these minor modifications. Plus, Manjaro has just a large history of making boneheaded mistakes. To name a few, there was a minor code issue and their package manager which crashed the Arch Linux package repositories where the applications are stored on a server, and not one, not two, but 3 times they have forgotten to renew the security certificate of their website. Now, granted, the second thing, or the latter, is a more minor issue, but it does show just a little history of forgetfulness and neglectfulness, which could result in issues. So if we're not going to use Manjaro, what is the Linux distribution of choice? My recommended Linux distribution for beginners is Garuda. Garuda Linux is a pretty easy to use and pretty easy to install Linux distribution that runs a vanilla Arch Linux kernel, meaning that it's completely unmodified. I have a friend who uses Garuda Linux and he seems to have no problems with it. But there it is, the Linux distribution that I recommend for beginners, especially people who are just looking to get the easiest switch from Windows to Linux, is Garuda. Now, I'm going to make another video about how to install Garuda. At the time of recording, I do not have that video even started yet, but if you're watching this video and if I've finished the other video and it's up, then there's going to be a link in the description and a title card should appear in the top right of your screen right about now. Another video that I'm planning on making before I make how to install Garuda Linux is the pros and cons of Linux. Again, I don't know if that video will be up by the time I upload this video, but if it is, there's going to be a title card for it right about now and a link in the description. I highly recommend going and checking that video out just to see if Linux is for you or not. But that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to drop a like if you found this video useful. And as a mild disclaimer, if you thought the editing style in this video was weird, where it's just me talking and then there's weird video in the background, just know that I'm completely new to this style of editing, so I don't really know what I'm doing, to be honest. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to drop a like if you found this video useful, and be sure to subscribe to continue following this series. And once again, if you somehow found this channel not from my gaming channel, be sure to check that out as well. Link in description. Have a good rest of your day.